The night had to be filled with something. It is the winter of 1348. The Black Death has killed 1 in 3 people across Europe. The roads are quiet. The markets are half empty. The church is telling people to pray, to fast, to repent. And yet, in the great hall of a manor house in Burgundy, on a Saturday evening in December, there is music, there is laughter. A man is doing something with a trained bear that is making the children scream with delight. Someone is losing badly at dice in the corner, and everyone around him knows it. A woman near the fire is telling a story that has the people nearest her completely silent, leaning in, waiting for what comes next. This is the part of medieval life that history books almost never tell you. Not the war, not the plague, not the theology. The part where, after the work was done, and the sun had gone down, and there was nothing left to do but exist inside the hours until morning, people found ways to make those hours worth living through. And what they came up with was not primitive. It was not desperate. In some cases, it was more socially sophisticated, more physically demanding, and more creatively rich than anything a screen has ever produced. The entertainment of the medieval world was built entirely on human presence, on skill, on wit, on the oldest and most powerful delivery mechanism ever invented, one human being in a room full of other human beings performing. The question is not how they survived without electronics. The question is how we forgot what they knew. The travelling performers, the people who carried joy on their backs. In the summer of 1306, Edward I of England held a feast at Westminster to celebrate the knighting of his son. The guest list included over 200 knights. The food bill was staggering, but buried in the household accounts for that single event is a payment record that tells you more about medieval entertainment than almost any other surviving document. 175 minstrels were paid to perform that evening. 175. Singers, instrumentalists, jugglers, acrobats, comedians, trained animal handlers, and at least one performer whose listed specialty was mimicry, the ability to impersonate voices and mannerisms with enough accuracy to make the court laugh. These were the jongleurs and minstrels, the professional entertainers of the medieval world, and they occupied a social position so contradictory it bordered on paradox. They were essential, and they were despised. Every lord wanted them at his feast. The church condemned them as morally corrupting. They were among the most travelled people in medieval Europe, moving between castle, market town and village fair in loose companies of 2 or 3, carrying their instruments and their props on their backs, sleeping rough between engagements, performing wherever an audience and a coin could be. Found in the same place at the same time, their skill sets were extraordinary by any standard. A professional juggler performing at a high-status feast in the 14th century was expected to juggle knives, balance objects on his face and feet simultaneously, and perform acrobatic sequences that modern circus performers train for years to achieve. A trained bear act, documented in English fair records from the 12th century onward, involved an animal that had been taught to dance, to mimic human gestures, and to perform sequences on command in front of crowds that had never seen a bear in their lives and responded to it with a terror and excitement that no screen could replicate. Because the bear was real, it was enormous, and it was 3 meters away. These performers did not just entertain. They carried news, they carried political satire, they carried songs that embedded current events in memorable form at a time when most of the population could not read. A minstrel who had been at the court of a French duke 2 weeks ago and was now performing in an English village market was, functionally, a news broadcast. Everything he sang and said and implied had travelled with him in his memory across hundreds of miles of road. The church understood this perfectly. It was precisely why they feared him. Feasts and games, when the entire community became the entertainment. Here is something that does not appear in any medieval text because it did not need to be written down. Everyone already knew it. In the medieval world, there was no separation between audience and performer. At a village feast, at a midsummer celebration, at the post-harvest gathering that marked the end of the agricultural year, the entertainment was not something that happened to the people present. It was something the people present created together, in real time with their bodies and voices and competitive instincts and the particular social energy of a group of human beings who had been working alongside each other for months and were now finally allowed to stop. The calendar of the medieval year was structured around these collective events with a precision that served a psychological function as much as a religious or agricultural one. There were over 40 official feast days in the medieval English calendar, days on which ordinary labor was prohibited and communal celebration was expected. Historians studying medieval peasant time use have calculated that the average English agricultural laborer in the 13th century worked fewer total days per year than his equivalent in the 19th century, precisely because the feast day calendar enforced regular collective rest. The entertainment was not incidental to these days, it was the point of them. The games played at these gatherings were not casual diversions. Archery competitions, mandatory practice for all able-bodied Englishmen under the Assize of Arms of 1252, which required regular training with the longbow, became the organizing structure of village feast day competition, with prizes recorded in village accounts ranging from a silver arrow to a live goose. Wrestling competitions were formalized enough in some regions to have documented rules and regional champions whose names appear in court records when their bouts turned injurious. Football, played between entire villages, with goals sometimes a mile apart, no limit on players, and essentially no rules beyond getting the ball to the other village's marker, was documented in English records from the 12th century onward and banned repeatedly by royal decree because it was injuring too many men who were supposed to be practicing archery instead. The ban never worked. People played anyway. Chess, dice, and the gambling problem nobody could solve. In 1254, King Louis IX of France issued a royal ordinance banning gambling throughout his kingdom. It failed within months. In 1291, Edward I of England banned dice games among his own military during the campaign in the Holy Land. His soldiers ignored him. In 1388, the English Parliament banned dice and other games of chance for labourers and servants, concerned that gambling was distracting the lower classes from the archery practice the crown depended on. The gambling continued. The pattern here is consistent across every country, every century, and every level of medieval society. Gambling was the entertainment that no authority could suppress, because no authority could make it less compelling than it was. Dice were among the most common objects recovered from medieval archaeological sites across Europe. Simple six-sided bone dice, nearly identical in dimension and marking to a modern die, have been found in castle undercrofts, tavern floors, shipwrecks, and military encampments. They cost almost nothing to produce. They required no equipment beyond a flat surface. They could be played in 10 minutes or 10 hours, and the combination of skill, chance, social pressure, and financial risk they created produced a quality of engagement that was, and remains, almost impossible to replicate by other means. Chess occupied the opposite end of the spectrum. Introduced to Europe through Moorish Spain in the 10th century, chess spread through the upper levels of medieval society with remarkable speed, reaching England by the 11th century and appearing in the household inventories of noble families across France, Germany, and Italy within the following 100 years. By the 13th century, it was considered a core accomplishment of the educated noble class, listed in conduct manuals alongside horsemanship, Latin, and the ability to compose verse as one of the things a well-formed nobleman was expected to be able to do. Chess sets recovered from medieval contexts range from simple carved bone pieces used in modest households to the extraordinary Lewis chessmen, carved from walrus ivory in the 12th century, discovered in the Scottish Outer Hebrides in 1831, their faces expressing a range of human emotions so precise and individuated that they look less like game pieces than like portraits of people the carver actually knew. Chess was not merely a game. It was a model of the social order, king, queen, bishop, knight, castle, and pawn, and playing it well was understood as a demonstration of the same strategic thinking that governed warfare, estate management, and political negotiation. A lord who lost badly at chess in front of his household lost something that the pieces on the board did not account for. Storytelling, the entertainment that ran on nothing but a human voice. Before the printing press, before literacy was common, before any mechanism existed for storing and transmitting narrative other than the human memory and the human voice, stories were the most powerful technology in the world. A good storyteller in a medieval hall was not a charming way to pass the evening. He was the evening. He was the news, the history, the moral instruction, the emotional release, and the collective dream of every person in that room, delivered live, in real time, with eye contact and gesture, and the particular electricity of a story being told rather than read. The chansons d'Este, the great narrative poems of the French medieval tradition, of which the Song of Roland is the most famous surviving example, were composed to be performed aloud, with musical accompaniment, to audiences who would never read them. The Song of Roland runs to approximately 4,000 lines. A skilled performer could deliver it across an evening in sections, returning the following night to continue, creating the same episodic tension that modern audiences experience across episodes of a television series. The audience knew this. They came back. They remembered where the story had stopped. They talked about what would happen next. The Welsh tradition of the bard, a professional poet-storyteller whose social status was codified in Welsh law as equivalent to that of a skilled craftsman, produced narrative performances so valued that a bard's harp was listed among the 3 possessions that could not be seized for debt, alongside a man's horse and his sword. You could take everything else. You could not silence the story. What made these performances work was not the story alone. It was the room, the firelight, the shared physical presence of people who had worked together and eaten together and buried their dead together. The storyteller did not create the emotion in that room. He gave it a shape. He gave the grief and the fear and the joy that those people were already carrying something to travel through, and when the story ended and the fire had burned low and people rose to go to bed, they carried the story with them into their sleep, into the next day, into the conversations they would have for weeks afterward about what the story had meant and whether the ending had been right. No screen has ever done that better. No screen has ever put you in a room with a fire and a voice and 40 other people feeling the same thing at the same moment and made you part of it rather than a witness to it. That is what medieval entertainment was. Not a replacement for something better, not a lesser version of what came later. It was the thing itself, the original, the version that worked on nothing but human presence and asked nothing in return except that you stay and listen and let it in.